Chaden, Halfhill, Silent Rivers, back with you on another Des Moines Arts Festival curated interview. And I'm with Jenifer Thoem today. She's in her studio. If you check that out, she's sitting in the Creative Foundry. Jenifer, welcome.
Thank you.
You're the inspiration for the show. It was actually a conversation that I had with you last year. When we worked together last year, you'd mentioned your own body of work and the idea that as a sculptor, as a potter, you had been working with large pieces. It was that idea that we evolve as artists, that we mature, that your journey was fascinating to me. And then I started looking at all these other artists that had been in shows for years, and they too had really unique stories. And so I thought it would be an interesting show to do a sort of a mini retrospective of each artist and show the threads of change that exist within the artist. So let's start there, because your story started it. How did you get from where you were to where you are, and tell us a little bit about your artwork?
Okay, so that is somewhat of a loaded question. I know that that's like spanning 25 years almost. I graduated with a fine arts degree in ceramics, and knew that there was nothing else that I wanted to be other than an artist. And so immediately went on to the show circuit with a body of work that was really large. And I grew up on a farm in Georgia, and have always created as a child, and I was heavily influenced by my surroundings. So I incorporated a lot of found objects and just old rusty pieces of farm equipment and barbed wire, and just different things that I could find on the farm into my clay work. So I found myself selling a body of work that was large, sculptural garden sculptures that were very, very heavy, and I would scavenge junkyards and scrapyards for pieces of rusty metal to incorporate into my figurative work. And so I did that for about 16 years, that same body of work. It was heavy, and throughout that time, I made some moves, of course, away from Georgia. Got married, moved away, moved to Atlanta, to Richmond, and in that time, my surroundings changed, and the ability for me to have friends in the scrapyard that I could go and scavenge, look through, and it just changed. I wasn't able to find those rusty pieces of metal, and I wasn't in that surrounding, so I wasn't necessarily being completely influenced by that. Besides the fact, I had 3 children in about 5 years.
That's an art in itself.
That kept me busy. That took me away from the scrapyard, really, away from my studio for sure. But in that time, I started feeling like I was creating the same work. I had changed. I'd moved locations. I had a family. My studio, I had 3 or 5 different studios in that amount of time. My environment was different. And I started feeling like my work was really forced, and I wasn't connected to it. And in the time that I was doing shows, I found myself making work that sold. Of course, that's our goal. But in that time, I felt very uncreative, and I felt like I had changed, but my work hadn't changed. And I had kids running around my studio and getting into my rusty metal, and just so much life change at that point that I started rethinking why I was actually doing it. Besides, I'm little. I'm 5'0", barely, and always had this need to create really large work, but logistically, like picking it up and, like you said, storing it and having just the ability to have large work sitting around with kids in my studio, it just all felt like I needed a change. But the scary part was changing. And I got to the point, I moved from Richmond, Virginia to Chicago about 10 years ago. And that was the point where I had stopped doing shows, just basically to raise my children, always in my studio still, trying to create, but really lost in trying to figure out what am I creating, because I'm not creating to sell anymore, because I didn't have shows on my schedule. I didn't have galleries taking my work anymore. I didn't have, I had the ability to create because I had a studio, but I just didn't, I was at the point where making my old work didn't make sense anymore. And so I found myself trying to almost reinvent myself, but feeling a loyalty to my old work, because that was my identity, and I sold a lot of it, and people knew me by that old work. And so it was almost like I had to let go of that and just experiment and develop a body of work, or try to figure out something that felt true to me, but still was but was changing and was fresh and new, and something that I hadn't done before, and but still staying true to who I am.
One of the things that I enjoyed in your own writing about your work is your, even as a kid, your love of playing with clay in the soil on the farm. And yet that's what you did. You said that you had to find yourself again. You had to you had to find that creativity, because the creativity, it's so common for an artist to find a body of work, and now that body of work sells. And that's part of what makes it so exciting talking to you, is your willingness to go into your personal space and figure out a new direction. And woo, came out, and here we are.
Yeah, so just a little bit about the work that I shipped to the studio. My work for probably 16 to about 16 years was really basically all the same. It was sculptural, it was figurative. The difference was the objects that I found made the work different. And so as I started looking for those 25 pieces, and they were really large, I realized that there was little chance of me being able to ship those. So I wish that I had at least one that you could have seen, because it is really it's very different. So what I started to do, once I decided that it was okay, I had to allow myself to kind of venture off, and I decided that way for me to evolve and still feel connected to my work was to create series, because my instinctual reaction in the studio was just to make what I had always made. And so what would happen is I would go into the studio and I would find myself creating the same work, but like just maybe a different color of clay. Or so I was really stuck in 16 and 19 years of just doing the same thing. But then when we made a big move, I had teenagers, and I realized that in order for me to be connected and to shift gears, I needed to create in response to situations that were happening in my life, and to be okay with that. And so the house series that I sent, those are really very, very small, but still very typical of my old work, in that I would find objects that I was drawn to and that felt comfortable to me. The rusty metal, the farm tools, the different things that are in that small body of work that's in the gallery. And so that was, and I started creating in series. So I decided that I would create a body of work, a series of work that had, 6 to 10 pieces in it, and that I wouldn't stop creating that body or that series of work until I had that many pieces. And so this house series, I had just moved to Chicago, and I don't know if you deal with people in houses, but you know how much absolute mess you have in your house. And if you ever have picked up and moved you realize that you like feel like you've like given dumpsters of stuff away and half of your house to Goodwill. But then when it starts coming off the moving truck, you realize, good gosh, like you got so much stuff and half of it you don't need, and it stays in a box until the next time you move. And so that house series came out of I had just moved, and that was one of the first series of work that I created in response to a situation that was happening. And in return, by doing that, I felt connected to it. So with that particular series, I created houses. I took some journal entries that are some things I do like to write. It helps me to get my thoughts from here out into the open. And so I stamped, which was very tedious, but on the houses, I stamped some entries from my journal. And that was also just a way, because I think my work really, in a personal way, deals with connection. And I don't necessarily know that it's always wanting the viewer to be connected, but I've always had, with ceramics, I've always felt like I needed a connection to it, because I felt like I wanted to put myself into it, but I couldn't necessarily do that when I was creating a mug or a cup, because I am not refined. I'm not a very refined thrower, on the potter's wheel. Like, that's never been my focus. Detail has not ever been my focus. And so I never felt connected to work that was, functional or in that way. But so the house series ended up being just kind of a segue into something else. So that was also the last body of work that I took, mostly metal and a little bit of clay. So I went from having work that was large clay pieces with some added metal to, mostly metal pieces with a little bit of clay. And then, oh, this is my kitty. Yeah. I should have a studio with way too many cats. But anyway, that's a story about that, the house series. And then after that, I just kept creating series that were a reflection or inspired by situations, good or bad, that were going on in my life. And in that time, we'd made a big move. I had, a child that was dealing with depression and anxiety, two teenage daughters, and a younger son, and all that comes with being a parent to teenagers. My dad passed away unexpectedly in Georgia. I missed home. So there was a lot of things to sculpt about at that time. And I just kind of never really knew when I was, like, I still don't feel like this body of work is there, but I have been able to take it from large three-dimensional sculptures to smaller sculptures that still incorporated my metal, to still feeling like I needed to work really large and three-dimensionally. And so I wanted to take my work to the wall, because it was, I felt like there was no confinement of space on the wall. I framed these pieces at first, and then realized that that was too confining, my framed pieces with this three-dimensional aspect to them. And so then I got rid of the frame and decided that that the whole wall was going to be my canvas, and being able to spread out and design, still using metal, because I do insert them into the wall using a metal stem, still having that three-dimensional quality, using shadows and light, and being able to use the wall and the space, but in a very open, and you're right, in a freeing way that is not confined to a frame. So
interestingly, I don't know if you caught that in your piece, and I actually used the frame or a niche in the wall, and I forced everybody into the box, kind of like playing off of the houses, and then I took that one and put it up there like it got out, and everybody's trying to get there, because in the back of my mind, part of what I'm thinking about is this: I didn't mount this show or consider it with COVID and our isolating tendencies right now. I didn't think about that because it didn't exist. I was just trying to talk about pivoting, and then by the time we're exhibiting, we're all talking about being in our studios with no market, no place to go, but there's a lot of personal time to really reflect on our work. What an amazing time, but what a creatively challenging. For some, it's very challenging because they're lost. For others, it's a very personal time that's very open because there's no boundaries.
Well, I really like that. So one of the most fun things that I'm doing right now with my work, which I'm not able to do, and I miss this aspect of it, but when I go to shows and I sell large installations, I go into the home and actually install it, which is, design and install according to the space. And so a lot of times people will come and say, I have this amazing wall in my living room, and that's where I want this to be. And so I'll go into the home, and then I'll see like this enormous stairway that's like a 3-story stairway, and say, how about here? Because I see a potential maybe that they don't, for more movement or for, more interesting vantage point or whatever. So when I saw that you had done that, it actually made me really happy, because you're using, that is, and I have been into homes where they do have like an alcove like that, or a niche that they haven't thought about putting it there. So I actually really love that, but that more than anything, because you were actually able to see the potential of using that space, but also very symbolic, of pulling some birds out of it, and not being in there, because that I do the feeling of being in my studio at first, every day, all day during this was I did feel trapped and felt isolated, and but doing shows and traveling and as busy as I am with everything that we all have on our plates, I sometimes would come in my studio and just be, it was like a whirlwind, and I never really had time to stop. I just knew that I had a show coming up, and I needed to work, not even enough hours in the day to get done what I needed to get done. And so slowing down and not having that, I think, is always very, very helpful, because not having any shows for me, this body of work is about 3 years old. And so it took me about 3 years to kind of go from my small series into what I'm doing right now. But it was not having shows, and it was not having, that whirlwind of like getting ready for that, and knowing that you had to make things that you thought would sell. It was at that point in my life that I was able to slow down and just kind of reevaluate and play, really, and experiment. I made a lot of stuff that didn't see the light of day, thank goodness, and I did throw out, reclaim a lot of clay, but anyway, back to your use of the space, I think that is a lot, that's a big part of it. And for me, allowing other people to, because I don't always go into the home and install. Sometimes I just sell a small grouping, and I have to sometimes convince the person that they can do it. Like, this is, you are an artist too, or you can, your space, and you can put it up and it'll be great. But
well, what it was for me, it was interesting because not only we had a niche, so we had a volume that it was captured within, and then it broke out. But like last year, it was about bending around that corner. And so what I like about what you've been able to, as you've moved from the object on the pedestal or the physical form on the floor, whatever the other work was looking like, is now it's on the wall, it's in the space, it can go up a staircase and tie together 2 volumes like an upstairs and downstairs. It can turn a corner. It can play with outdoor light and indoor light. You have the ability, with the way you've adapted this, to really change the atmosphere in which this room is. And it's this and these little evocative pieces that are very intimate and very personal that all of a sudden redefine an entire room. That's what's so exciting about the work, because it's both intimate and large in scale. It's very ephemeral, but yet very close knit. And you know, and as you say, you can work with the people, and they get to know the piece, or they might install it, or you can go and build a relationship and respond directly. So you may ship it with 50 pieces, but the piece may actually evolve or redefine once you get there. So there's a very intuitive nature to it in terms of finding and kind of expressing how it's going to be set. The other thing that's kind of fun is if somebody really wanted to, because people do rearrange their houses periodically, you can take them off the wall, replaster it, paint it, and put them back in a different configuration. So there's also that potential to change based on where you are in life. Very similar to where we are right now, because the whole show is about pivoting. Emerging Horizons is the title. It's as much about personal development and creative exploration as it is about pivoting and change. When you heard that title, what does it mean to you, and how do you, as an artist and as a festival artist in particular, how do you see, where do you see yourself going in this new era?
My work is somewhat of a hard sell at a show. A lot of times it's just so different. Repetition to me is extremely important. And so when people walk by and view my setup, there's a lot going on in my booth. And so a lot of times they're like, can't see how that would translate into their own home, like thousands of these little pieces on the wall. And I at first felt like, oh no, this is going to be really bad, because I have to like really talk to people and explain to them that this is all about creating an installation in your home that draws your eye across the wall. And I do clouds and birds and things that typically would be up in the air and lifted, and I do pea pods and other noses and things that you wouldn't typically see on the wall. So it's all about the feeling of like, where, how can we create this art piece in your home that does what you want it to do? Do you need it to fill this wall? Do you need your eye to be drawn to this other piece of art? And then me actually going from creating it to installing it has been very amazing. And that's only been happening for a couple of years. But so when everything shut down, I thought there's no way that, how am I ever going to sell this if I'm not able to talk to someone and explain to them that, yes, if you do move, I can come and pull these out of your wall and change them, or this is how you do it. But I've been really, really lucky to have partnered with Artful Home, and they have a very strong client base. So they're online, they do catalogs, and so I've been selling a lot of work with them over this quarantine time. I did one thing that was different that I swore I would never do or be able to do was I created a template and for my work. And so I had a series of 50 birds in their catalog, and they said, the only way that we can do this is if people are able to create this exact piece on their own.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So that shows me that, I just assume everybody can do it. Like, you can do this and put it on your wall and just design it. There's no right and no wrong. But in reality, giving people the tools to create something that they still feel like is my work, I can see that maybe there will be more of that, of me, and that didn't feel great at first, because it felt like, like I'm kind of like moving towards an uncreative place with that. But then I realized that, people want my design, and they want, that part from creating to in piece to be me, or they don't have to use it. So so I can see that I am moving more into making it easier for other people, or more convenient for them to install. I can't wait to get back to shows. I miss that personal interaction with other artists and with the people, clients, not even people that buy, but just talking. I think it helps to sit in a space, a booth with your work for 3 days, all day long, and talk to people about what you do and why you do. And because sometimes you just create because you create and there's not a why. Sometimes you create and then you figure out, oh, that's why I did that. But I just want to get back on. I want the shows to happen again. It's just sad to not be in that space and with the people that, that you can talk about why you do what you do with. But,
I hope that everybody that's watching this, takes a serious interest in what you're saying, and also takes an interest in engaging you either online or through any of your media. How would they find you? I presume you have a website.
I do have a website. It's my name, Jenifer Thoem. I am not the best social media. That is one thing that I said during quarantine I was going to get great at, was social media and posting, and I have not gotten great at it. But
Well,
I do have a website. I have Facebook and Instagram, and then I do sell through Artful Home as well.
well, my hopes is it you continue to thrive and continue to have a great summer. I will look forward to seeing you at the next festival. And if not before, for some interesting reason, maybe we'll have a chance to collaborate. I think it's always a lot of fun.
Well, I appreciate all that you do, and would trust you with my many pieces at any time. So.
All right. Well, you have a great weekend. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.